that feeling.
Yeah.
You know it, right? That quiet sense that you're maybe capable of more, that there's a fuller version of yourself just waiting to emerge. It's not always loud, but it's like a quiet ache of unrealized potential.
Yeah.
Maybe the intentions are solid, the desire to grow is real,
Yeah.
but the actual getting there, that feels, well, stuck.
That resonates really deeply. And, our listener provided this fascinating collection of thoughts and research exploring this exact feeling of being stuck.
Ah, okay.
What's striking is the breadth that goes from the intensely personal struggles right through to how these dynamics play out in wider communities.
Right.
And all viewed through a lens of faith.
Absolutely. It seems like we've got perspectives on how to really sort of fire up our journey of discipleship.
Right.
How to take an honest look at where we stand now spiritually. The vital role of understanding different cultures came up too.
Yes, that was prominent.
And even the maybe surprising insights that come from understanding local context is a really rich mix.
It is.
So our mission here, I suppose, is to dive deep into these resources. We want to pull out practical, faith-rooted strategies. How do we move beyond just wishing for growth and actually build a more effective path forward, in all the different areas of our lives that matter?
It's a fundamental question, really. And the sources give us a powerful starting point, defining what we even mean by growth, particularly from a biblical perspective.
Okay.
It's not quite the same as the usual self-improvement narratives we hear everywhere.
Right. Okay, so let's unpack this idea of biblical growth. What's the core difference there? What are we actually aiming for?
Well, the sources consistently highlight that growth within this faith framework is fundamentally about a deepening alignment with God's purposes.
Okay.
And actively becoming more like Christ. One source even pointed straight to Ephesians 4.1-3:16, this idea of maturing into the fullness of Christ as the ultimate goal.
Interesting.
And what's interesting is that this isn't just about individual betterment. It has ripple effects in how we relate to others and the world around us.
So it's less about ticking off a personal checklist of achievements.
Exactly.
And more about a profound sort of outward-facing transformation.
Precisely. And the sources paint a really broad picture of where this growth can and maybe should happen. Spiritual formation, that deepening of our personal relationship with God, that's presented as foundational.
Makes sense.
But it definitely extends out to our professional lives, finding fulfillment in work that uses our unique God-given abilities.
Right. Using our gifts.
Exactly. And interestingly, some sources suggested that prioritizing relational health can actually be a leading indicator of success in your professional calling.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, the idea is that strong networks, genuine connections, often open unexpected doors. It's not just about feeling connected personally, but it can be a strategic element of growth in other areas too.
Huh. That's a fascinating connection. I hadn't quite thought about it that way. What other dimensions of growth did these resources explore?
Well, intellectual and skill development came up as another key area, like a commitment to continuous learning and expanding our understanding.
Okay, lifelong learning.
Yeah. Then there's relational health, nurturing those supportive bonds with family, friends, our wider community.
Crucial.
And our physical and emotional well-being also feature prominently. Recognizing the importance of honoring our bodies as temples. It's a very holistic view.
It really does cover a lot of ground, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The sources also touch on financial stewardship, managing resources in a way that reflects our values.
Wise management.
Creative expression, unlocking that unique creativity God has placed within each of us. Missional engagement, actively serving others, contributing to God's kingdom.
Right, looking outwards.
And crucially, character development, cultivating virtues like patience, kindness, integrity, things that really reflect Christ.
Wow. Okay, when you lay it all out like that, it could feel a bit like we need to be excelling in every single area all at once.
Right. And that's a critical point the sources really emphasize. Growth is deeply personal. It's multifaceted.
Okay.
It's definitely not a competition with others, and there's absolutely no one-size-fits-all approach. Your journey of growth will have its own unique shape, its own rhythm.
And that's okay.
And that's perfectly okay. And the interplay between these dimensions is also key. Growth in one area can often fuel progress in another, sometimes in surprising ways.
Okay, so we have this inspiring, if maybe a little daunting, vision of growth, this multifaceted becoming. But, well, as anyone who's tried to make a change knows, there are always bumps in the road, roadblocks. What were some of the common ones that these sources identified?
Oh, the sources delve into these barriers quite thoroughly. We can probably group them in a few helpful ways.
Okay.
First, we see internal psychological barriers, things like fear of failure.
A big one.
Huge. And often, this stems from a deep-seated belief that our worth is somehow tied to our achievements
Yeah.
rather than rooted in God's unconditional love for us. Imposter syndrome, that persistent feeling of being a fraud, even when there's evidence of competence, that's another significant hurdle.
Oh, definitely. I think a lot of us can relate to that feeling of, when are they going to find out I'm just winging it?
Exactly. Then there's perfectionism with its unrealistic demands, which, ironically, often leads to procrastination or burnout.
Right.
Negative self-talk, that internal voice constantly contradicting God's truth about who we are, that can be incredibly undermining.
Undermining is the right word.
And analysis paralysis, just getting so bogged down in overthinking that we never actually take that first step.
It's like our own minds can become the biggest obstacles sometimes.
You really can. What other kinds of roadblocks did the sources highlight?
Well, motivational deficits also play a significant role.
Yeah.
Burnout, that state of just complete emotional, physical, spiritual exhaustion,
Total depletion.
can make any kind of growth feel utterly impossible. A disconnect from our core values can leave our goals feeling hollow, meaningless.
Yeah, no why behind it.
Right. A lack of clear purpose can leave us feeling adrift, aimless. And even spiritual dryness, that sense of distance or disconnection from God, that can severely impact our drive too.
So it's not always about external circumstances, is it? Often the biggest battles are internal, affecting our very desire, our motivation to move forward.
That's a key insight, I think. But the sources also address practical constraints.
Okay. Like what?
Things like time management, just feeling overwhelmed, struggling to prioritize what truly matters.
Yeah, the tyranny of the urgent.
Exactly. A lack of resources, maybe financial, maybe skills-based, or even just the absence of a supportive network.
Right. Practical gaps.
Inefficient workflows, general disorganization.
Yeah.
Those can also be major obstacles, turning simple tasks into huge hurdles.
Friction points.
And the sources even touch on broader systemic issues, things like geographic disparities in access to opportunities.
Okay. Bigger picture stuff.
Lack of diverse representation in leadership, and the very real impact of systemic injustice.
Wow. So it's multi-layered.
It really is. It's sobering to realize how many different factors can hold us back, some within our control, others much larger.
And the sources also mentioned environmental factors, didn't they?
Yes, they did.
Yeah.
An unsupportive environment, filled with negativity, criticism, or just a lack of understanding from those around you that can be incredibly discouraging.
Drains your energy.
Totally. The sources also raise important points about unacknowledged colonial mentalities, subtle ways historical power dynamics can still influence our thinking, even in faith communities.
Subtle but powerful.
And ethnocentric biases, one source highlighted how we can unconsciously assume that the way our culture does things is the right or best way.
Yeah, the default setting.
Potentially overlooking valuable perspectives from other cultures, even within the church. And cultural blindness, the sort of fallacy of ignoring very real cultural differences.
Pretending they don't exist. Right. Communication breakdowns where misunderstandings just create friction, and a cycle of discouragement and isolation were also highlighted as significant environmental barriers.
These are complex issues, aren't they? With deep roots that can subtly undermine our best efforts. And the sources also address the spiritual dimension of these roadblocks.
Absolutely. Fear and unbelief, a fundamental lack of trust in God's provision and guidance that's seen as a core barrier.
Foundational.
Syncretism and compromise. And here we mean the blending of different religious or cultural beliefs, sometimes in a way that compromises core biblical principles that can dilute our faith and direction.
Water it down.
Yeah. Spiritual opposition and resistance are also acknowledged as very real forces that can hinder growth.
Not just psychological or practical.
No. The sources even point to the sin of partiality, showing favoritism, neglecting those with fewer resources, and the impact of cultural idolatry and worldview conflicts that clash with biblical truth. There's a strong emphasis on recognizing and addressing those unacknowledged colonial mentalities we mentioned, and avoiding spiritualized generalizations that oversimplify complex cultural realities,
Right.
which can sometimes lead to what one source called a universal church paradox, where specific cultural contexts get ignored in the name of unity. Lack of intercultural humility was another key point.
Okay. It's clear that truly moving forward requires us to look at these challenges from multiple angles: internal, external, environmental, spiritual.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what pathways to reigniting our drive and action did these sources suggest? How do we break through?
Well, a powerful recurring theme is the need to integrate what one source terms spiritual listening with empirical evidence, or you could say wisdom and data.
Yep.
It's about a balanced approach, one that respects both divine guidance and the practical realities of our lives and communities. It's
Yeah.
really not an either situation.
So we don't have to choose between, say, seeking God's will in prayer and being practical and strategic in our planning.
Not at all. In fact, the sources suggest they should work together. Another crucial concept is establishing a discipleship baseline.
How about baseline?
Yeah, or taking stock of our current reality. Before we can effectively chart a course forward, we need an honest understanding of where we are starting from,
Right. Know your starting point.
which involves intentional self-assessment.
Okay. What kind of self-assessment are we talking about here? What did the sources suggest?
Several key areas to examine.
Okay.
Things like a skills audit to identify our existing strengths and maybe areas where we need to develop.
Okay. What you've got, what you need.
Exactly. Values clarification exercises to make sure our actions and goals really align with what truly matters to us at our core.
Mm-hmm. Your non-negotiables.
Spiritual gifts inventories to better understand how God has uniquely equipped us. And even on a broader scale, things like a demographic inclusion audit to understand who is and maybe who isn't being reached and served effectively in our communities.
Wow, that's a very thorough way to take stock. Okay, so once we have that baseline understanding, what's the next critical step according to these resources?
Setting a clear North Star is vital.
A North Star.
Yeah, a well-defined vision of the growth we desire in those specific areas we've identified. It gives direction, helps us stay focused.
Audit. A clear target.
And then the sources strongly advocate for the micro-win strategy.
Micro wins. Okay, tell me more.
It's all about taking small, consistent steps to build momentum, making tangible progress, even if it seems incremental at first. Small wins add up.
I really like that idea. It feels much less overwhelming than trying to make huge leaps all at once, you know?
Exactly. It breaks it down.
So what are some of the practical tools and techniques the sources recommended to actually support this, to make those micro wins happen?
Oh, there's a wealth of actionable suggestions. Things
Oh.
like using affirmations, but specifically ones grounded in biblical truth to actively counter that negative self-talk we mentioned.
Okay. Fighting back with truth.
The disciplines of prayer and journaling, seeing those as powerful tools for seeking discernment and clarity. Engaging in those values, clarification exercises to really guide our decision-making.
Mm-hmm. Practical spirituality.
Creating detailed skills gap analyses and maybe personal learning plans to strategically address areas where we want to grow.
Being intentional about learning.
Conducting market research and informational interviews, especially valuable if you're exploring or transitioning within your professional calling.
Getting real-world data.
Yes, those all sound like very concrete steps we can take. What else did these resources point to?
Well, networking and intentionally building a supportive ecosystem is seen as crucial.
Right, not going it alone.
Actively seeking out mentors who can offer guidance, finding accountability partners to help keep us on track,
Yeah, that accountability piece is huge.
and connecting with communities that genuinely foster growth. Implementing practical tools like time blocking and prioritizing tasks specifically in alignment with their core values.
Making time for what matters.
Cultivating practices of gratitude and mindfulness to help us stay present and appreciate the journey, not just the destination. Setting healthy boundaries to protect our time and energy.
Essential for avoiding burnout.
Recognizing the importance of practicing confession and repentance in our spiritual walk. Regularly reframing negative self-talk by consciously reminding ourselves of biblical truths.
Rewiring those thought patterns.
Implementing a consistent spiritual rhythm disciplines that nourish our relationship with God. Actively seeking feedback from trusted sources and being genuinely open to learning from those insights.
Even when it's hard to hear.
Right. And celebrating progress. Acknowledging even the smallest victories along the way.
So important for motivation.
And then, thinking more broadly again, using data thoughtfully. Things like skills audits, community needs assessments, feedback loops to inform strategies.
Wisdom and data again.
Conducting what one source called ethnographic interviews and cultural audits to gain a deeper understanding of different cultural contexts.
Really listening to understand.
Identifying and consciously addressing our own underlying cultural assumptions. Collaborating directly with local leaders to ensure that strategies are culturally relevant and effective.
Working with, not just for.
Mapping the existing discipleship terrain. Understanding areas of strength and areas of significant challenge or need. Conducting a spiritual audit of regions, perhaps.
Strategic assessment.
Creating resource webs and developing bridge-building strategies to connect those who have resources with those who need them most.
Building connections.
And even applying the principles of asset-based community development. Okay, what's that in a nutshell?
It basically emphasizes identifying and leveraging the existing strengths and resources within a community rather than just focusing on its deficits or problems.
Building on strengths.
Exactly. So instead of asking what's missing here, the question becomes, what strengths and assets do we already have that we can build upon?
It sounds like a very intentional, collaborative, and holistic approach is really key then.
Absolutely. The sources really underscore the importance of actively seeking input from trusted individuals, from mentors, from the wider community.
Not an isolated pursuit.
Definitely not. Establishing a consistent feedback loop to regularly review our progress and make necessary adjustments to our strategies. Adaptability is key.
Learning as you go.
And underpinning all of this, always, is the foundational significance of anchoring our efforts in biblical principles and consistently seeking God's guidance through prayer.
This has been incredibly helpful, really providing both a framework for understanding why we might feel stuck and just a wealth of practical ideas for moving forward. So if someone is listening right now and that feeling of being stuck still resonates, what would you say is the most important takeaway?
I think it's that feeling of being stuck isn't really a sign of failure. As one of the sources put it quite eloquently, it's more like a divine invitation to a deeper approach.
An invitation.
Yeah. It's a signal, perhaps, to move beyond just passive good intentions and engage more thoughtfully, more intentionally with the journey of growth in all its dimensions.
Okay. So what's one small, actionable first step you'd encourage our listener to take this week based on all this?
Maybe take some time to reflect on those various dimensions of growth we discussed: spiritual, professional, relational, and so on. And just try to identify your North Star in maybe just one or two of those areas.
Just one or two.
Yeah. Where do you feel most called to focus your energy right now? Then remember the power of those small, consistent micro wins.
Right.
Identify just one tiny, manageable step you can take in that direction this week, something truly achievable, and commit to it. And remember to try and integrate both that spiritual wisdom and practical action into your approach.
That's fantastic advice. Manageable and focused. So as we bring this deep dive to a close, here's maybe a final thought for you, our listener, to mull over. How can you take just one small, intentional step this week to start bridging that gap between your current reality and the growth you deeply desire, remembering that God is absolutely with you every single step of the way? We really encourage you to revisit these ideas, maybe dig into some of the source material further if you can, as you continue on your own unique and meaningful path of growth.